So you've taken the step. You've downloaded and installed Claude Cowork or Antigravity or Codex, and you're trying to get an AI agent to help you do some actual work in your actual job. And the problem you probably have run into is that AI is very generic in nature. So it understands a lot of broad concepts in the world, and it's able to look up and gather information about and work on projects that have to do with common knowledge domains. And this can all be really useful, and there's probably a lot of atomic individual tasks you can point it at. But how do you start getting your AI agent to do more than just answer questions, maybe help you fill something out with generic information, or build you something that is always generic and homogeneous in nature? So, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about skills today. I think that skills right now represent one of the best ways to get domain specific context and knowledge into an AI solution, start helping you do something that actually feels valuable and starts to actually feel like you're getting an AI to do some work in the way that you would do the work, which ultimately makes it feel like you're able to apply some leverage to what you do every day and reclaim some time back from some menial tasks because the tasks are getting done in a way that approaches the bar of quality that you would do if you did them yourself. And that allows you to start increasing your quality or your output or whatever. So I've got a couple of slides for us today we're going to look at, and we'll talk about this a little bit. And what I want to cover today is what is a skill? Why does that matter? How is that different than just any other file or prompt? And what are some good examples of this in real work scenarios? And for that, I'm going to show you some examples of some skills I've built that help me do my job. So, what is a skill? Why do we care about it? So, a skill is knowledge that an agent can pull in at runtime. And when you really oversimplify this or boil it down, it's just more prompting. So when I go to type a prompt and ask AI to do something for me or to answer a question for me, ultimately I could just sit there for 2 hours and write the perfect prompt that contains every input token that needs to make it into that model to give me exactly what I want. And then I would get the result that I want or something close to it, since it is, after all, a token generator that is non-deterministic in nature. But how can I increase the amount of quality I get by putting less into my prompts? And one of the easiest ways to do that is skills. Now, the first thing to kind of call out once you start to understand skills a little bit is what makes this special. Because skills are ultimately just a file that the agent has access to that contains some writing in general. And how is this any different than just running my agent in a tree of files that the agent can then go read and understand and have more context? So, at its base level, it's not. If you're able to tell your agent, there's a file 2 folders deep that contains exactly what you need to know about this thing, go read it and then work on this thing. That is ultimately going to work basically just as good as a skill. And if that's how you want to work, go ahead. But here is where skills are really nice. The agent reads only a one-line description for each skill that's loaded. So let's say you have 15 skills for your agent, and each one of those skills is reasonably well designed. So each one of those skills should have a single line description that gets passed to the agent on the beginning of its turn. So as soon as you send your prompt across to the agent, it's going to get your prompt and it's going to get all of these descriptions as well. So if you have 10,000 skills that each have a one line description, that could significantly impact the agent, and you probably shouldn't do that. But if you have a reasonable number of skills, 5 to 25 ish, and each of those load that one line description, this just lets the agent know what tools it has access to go learn more information about the task at hand. So I said a one line description. Now, technically, that one line could be as long as you want. But what I always tell people to try to do is try to make that one line be about a tweet. So if it can be, it doesn't have to just be one sentence, but it needs to be just what the agent needs to know to understand if that skill contains relevant information for the task at hand. So once the description matches the task at hand, so a good example of that would be, we're working on something here at ExtraHop, and I am talking about something that has to do with platform architecture, and I have a skill called ExtraHop architecture. So just by talking about ExtraHop architecture, if my description talks about ExtraHop architecture or indicates that that skill is intended for that purpose, that should be enough for the agent to trigger the skill. Once a skill gets triggered, the agent only reads the contents of the skill.md file. Now, we'll get into the details of this a little bit here in a moment, but essentially, that is the first step, and that should contain most of what the agent needs. And in many cases, that is the entire skill. So many skills you'll see out there are essentially a one-line description to pique the agent's interest, and then a single file that contains the information that's needed. There's a lot of great use cases for skills that are this simple, but we also want to talk about what I think are the real value of skills, which is when you need to provide a lot of information to the agent, but the agent probably doesn't need all that information every time. So let's look here at what this might look like as we scroll down to my next slide. So one file to start and as much as the job needs from there. So here's some examples on the screen of, a simple skill, as I mentioned before, your directory with your skill with your one-line description, and then a skill.md, which is one file that gives the agent some instructions or some context. But scaled up, what can you really do with skills? So a really good example, a way I use skills a lot, is to have skill.md deliver to the agent the most critical body of knowledge for the subject that we're about to talk about in a concise way, and then points the agent to a whole library of contained information that is relevant, but maybe not needed right now. So the agent, a good example of this would be I'm working on something. I'm working on a lawnmower, and I have the user manual for that lawnmower that is 650 pages of everything that has to do with this mower. But right now, I'm only working on swapping the blade. So to swap the blade, I probably don't need to read the entire user manual every time, but I do need that whole manual. So the skill.md is sort of like that index in that manual that says for working on the blade, you should go to page 386. And then I go to page 386 and I learn what I need to know. That is how this works. So by putting sort of an index to where the information lives in the skill.md, you can then go to the correct chapter, to the correct reference form, and read the right document. But by building it out this way and keeping the skill available to the agent, it means that you as a user can just work with the agent. And the agent will go read the right chapter in the manual every time that you talk about something that's important. That's the gist. Now, what's really cool about skills is they are not constrained to being only documentation. A skill can contain just about anything. I've built skills that contain software development kits inside of them, templatized examples of how to do work. In fact, and this is a lot of times where some of the most powerful skills come from, is when the skill itself contains some examples of what good work looks like. So that not only does it get to read how to do good work and follow the instructions for what to do and learn all the first order principles it needs to know in order to think correctly, how to reason well about the task, but it also has some examples of like in the past when this was the scenario, here is what good looks like. So powerful for an agent if you want to get really predictable results. So let's have a look at a skill or two with this baked in. Some of the ones I use to do my actual job, and hopefully this will tie all this together for you. And in Claude Desktop, you can go to Customize Skills, and you'll have a library of all the skills you might have. Now, all of the different agent harnesses out there, from great CLI-based harnesses like Pi to open source powerful agent solutions like Hermes, through to all the desktop variants from the big labs like Codex, Antigravity, and Claude Code, all have some concept of skills or something skill-like. So you just need to look at the documentation for your own tool for that. I know a lot of you out there use Claude Cowork, and so we're going to use that as our example. The main reason I'm using this today, though, is that I think Cowork has one of the easiest built-in skill viewers. This will be a good way for us to look at some skills together. So here in Cowork, I'm going to pick on my extra hop architecture skill because I think this represents a really good example of using some of this, what we like to call progressive disclosure, which is this whole idea of giving the agent more information as it needs more, rather than front loading the conversation with everything it could possibly need and forcing it to sort of eat all of that data at once. So this skill has a one-line description that is kind of big, but still about a tweet. And this is all that gets preloaded to the agent whenever I start a session with an agent that has this skill available to it. This skill helps it understand what it can do with it. It can use the skill as a reasoning substrate to understand extra hop deployments. What data can it consume? What can it produce? What are the core components, modules, evidence, and how does all that fit together? And then I have some trigger words. So anytime I'm talking about, any one of these trigger words, this can also help invoke the skill. In my opinion, trigger words are usually not needed. So this skill with a description that is only here is probably good enough. I, however, invoke this skill very often, and I want this loaded into my agent's context quite often in the line of work that I do. So having this be almost always on is useful to me. So I've overloaded this description a little bit to help ensure this gets invoked all the time. It's a very important skill for what I do, because this provides that reasoning substrate. This provides that ground truth facts that the agent can then think about things from and not hallucinate nonsense, but really have the context available to it to come up with good ideas and directionally accurate assumptions, even if the data isn't all contained herein. So the skill.md is now what we're looking at here. This is the thing when the agent says, yes, that description fits the job at hand, let's read the skill, then all of this gets shoved into the agent as part of the next turn. All of this is going to get read. So this is a little bit chunky. So this is probably, I don't know, let's say maybe 700 tokens or so. This against an agent's context window of typically today around 275,000 tokens is still a very small amount of data because this is just text, it's just markdown. This is still very efficient. But what's key here that I want to call out is this load narrow context. So basically what happens here is the agent gets the description, invokes the skill. Now it understands a little bit more information about when to use this. And then we've got this nomenclature rule. So we're going to make sure the agent understands all of the things we call products here at ExtraHop, what acronyms we use to prefix those. And we call out some historical nomenclature because ExtraHop products have gone through some nomenclature changes over the years, and the documentation may invoke any one of these things. I've been here for 8 years. I might say an old term just out of habit. And I want to make sure that all these dots are connected for the agent. Next, most importantly, we have that index effect where the agent can look here and say, if I need to learn about packet ingest, in-memory flow processing, state machines, decryption, protocol analysis, and triggers, I should go read this core packet engine file. So on and so forth. Each domain of knowledge is broken out into a separate file. This means that for the agent to reason about ExtraHop, if I just came today to talk about device discovery, it can read the description, read the initial skill file, and then go read the device discovery file. All of the rest of this user manual is available, but it only needed to go consume what it needed. So how does that next progressive disclosure step work? Well, once it's read the skill.md and it sees that there is a domains/device discovery file that it needs to go read next, if we look here at the skill hierarchy, I can expand this and you can see that next to skill.md is this domains directory. This is bundled into the skill. When I expand it, all of these documents are nested under here. So the agent then goes and reads just device discovery, where it gets this tight, 250, 350 token document that tells it just what it needs to know about device discovery so we have a productive conversation.